Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I'm Dan Chuparkoff. Thank you all for coming today. I know there's a lot of stuff on the agenda that's really, really interesting in all the tracks. Thanks for coming to mine today. So a little disclaimer at the front. My presentation is called Kick-Ass Software Development. I'm probably going to say the word kick-ass kind of a lot. So if that's offensive to you, I apologize. It's going to come up like 150 times. So if that bothers you, you might want to go to the IBM session or the HP one. Anyway, so I'm Dan Chuparkoff, and I'm wearing a funny green suit, which might not make any sense to you if you haven't seen the movie Kick-Ass. But in the movie, he's also wearing a mask. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to wear a mask in a casino, but I wore it for about 82 seconds. I came down in the elevator just a couple floors, and there were actually two guys waiting for me. Literally in less than a minute, they saw me on the video, had guys mobilized. My mask has been confiscated. I can get it when I check out. So luckily, I didn't get dragged in a back room, or my head didn't get dunked underwater, or none of those things. So. But anyway, the moral of the story, don't wear masks in casinos. So back to the content. The movie Kick-Ass is about this kid. He's a teenager. He decides he just wants to get a costume like this, except for the mask. And he goes out and he tries to stop criminals. So he's just a normal guy. Like, he doesn't get bitten by a spider. He doesn't have superpowers. He can't fly. He doesn't even have a cool car. But he goes out there and he starts fighting criminals. And his first day, he puts the suit on and goes out and he sees some guys and they're breaking into a car. And he tries to stop them, and it goes horribly wrong. Like, he gets beaten, he's stabbed, he's hit by a car. Like, it's terrible, right? Bad first day. So as I'm watching this movie, I started to realize, in my last 15 years of software development, it started to feel a little bit like that, right? Like, I'm just a normal guy, and I'm out there trying to change the world with software. And, at the end of some days, maybe most days, I felt like I was beaten and stabbed and hit by a car. And so I started to identify with this movie a little. Now I'm at a place called Atlassian. It doesn't feel like that. It's pretty awesome. So I'm here today to talk about some of the things that makes Atlassian awesome and some of the things that make us do kick-ass software development every single day. So first, raise your hands if you've heard of Atlassian and know what we do. Awesome. That's fantastic. So for the few that don't, or the liars, we make software for teams that build software, right? So we have tracking products. Jira is kind of famous. Confluence is our collaboration tool, and Stash is our code repository management tool. There are other products in the family as well, but these are sort of the three pillars. Okay, raise your hand again. Who expects to see some kick-ass code in this presentation? I'm happy to see that was only about 10, because this is all the code I'll be showing you. Okay, who expects to learn a new methodology, right? Anyone? There is no kick-ass manifesto, yet, at least. So you can't get certified in kick-ass. You just have to do it. Okay, who just wants to kick ass when they leave here? Awesome. All right. So good. This is your talk. So I'm here to tell you how we kick ass, and hopefully you grab some nuggets out of here that you can bring back to your teams. That's actually me with the real mask before it got confiscated. Okay. So when I say kick ass development, how do you do it? Use Java. That's it. Thank you. No, actually, the language is hardly matters at all, right? You can kick ass with Java, you can kick ass with Ruby. It doesn't matter. It's more about how you collaborate as a team. So why should you listen to me? This is me. I'm Dan. I live in San Francisco. That's my wife. I started doing development in 1994. I worked on a CRM system and a loyalty system, and I worked at an agency for a while where we did a billion different things, and then some recruitment software. Now I'm at Atlassian working on the Jira product. And so during that 15 years, a lot of that time, my responsibility was to make sure my team was building kick-ass software, right? So I've been sort of focused on this topic for a long time. And so when I say kick-ass software, what do I mean by that, right? So if I get to call myself the software that we're making kick-ass, right, what I mean is the quality should be awesome, right? I should be doing it with less overhead, right? The only thing I'm doing that provides real value is developing software, right? Everything else is getting in the way and throttling back my ability to deliver software to my users. Whether they're internal or external doesn't matter. We're here to deliver software. Next, I want to make sure it's faster, right? I want to get from having an idea to fleshing it out, to assigning it to somebody, to testing it, to rolling it to production in a really short amount of time. I'm not talking about a 2-week sprint or a 10-day sprint or a 5-day sprint. I'm talking about like 8 minutes, right? Like I want to be able to get from concept to production in a really, really short amount of time. Next, I want to make sure I have happy customers, right? When my users come in the morning and start using my software, I want them to be like, yes, I get to use this again. It's awesome, right? If that's not happening, then I'm doing something wrong. And finally, my developers that are working with me, they need to love it, right? I want them to work with me for a really long time. I'm invested in them, and they're invested in me. So I want to make sure that continues. So 5 years ago, if you asked me this question, some people did ask me this question 5 years ago, and I said Agile, right? Agile is the answer. It will solve a lot of our problems. It's the new way to do it. We need to react to change faster. That's how I solved our stuff. Now, what's the state of Agile right now? Some people might suggest that Agile is dead. We need to reinvent it. There needs to be a new manifesto, all those things. This was from a slide in Portland a little bit ago. It's the diabolical developer. His name is Martin Verbeek. He presented on this, and his lesson is, if it compiles, ship it, right? Your end users are there to test your stuff, right? They use it way more than you do. So now, I'm not prepared to go all the way to that extreme, but there's a nugget of awesomeness in here, and what he's saying is he wants to get from developing code to having it in the hands of users immediately, right? And he doesn't want to just ship broken stuff. Like, that's not what he's about, but he's about trying to make sure that you're minimizing the amount of time between those two steps, right? And so we believe that at Atlassian too, but we're not going to do that. There are some other people that are rewriting Manifesto, right? The dark Manifesto. They're changing some of the language and getting more strict and trying to make sure that enforcing Agile is the way to solve some of the problems. This is not what we're about either. So is Agile dead? Is it time for something new? Here's what I think. So everyone's familiar with the technology adoption lifecycle, right? So you have some early adopters and some early majority, late majority laggards, right? And those people adopt new things at a different time. So back in 2001, we had something that looked like this, right? Somebody writes the Agile Manifesto, and they start talking about stuff. And some early adopters that have very small teams and are comfortable with risk, they start jumping in and experimenting with it. And then some time moves past, and the early majority gets in, they start reading about it, more people hear about it, then there's some case studies, and so other people say, hey, that big company's doing it, so I could do it too, we'll try it out. And then some more time passes, and that keeps propagating down, right? And so this is how the world has sort of grabbed onto Agile over the last decade. So what does it look like today, right? Are we all the way Agile? Is everybody trying it a little bit? Like, what does all the way Agile even mean? Not sure. I don't actually think it matters. What I actually think today looks like is a little bit more like this, right? That graph is starting to move off the other end of the page, right? There are some early adopters in this room and out of this room that are experimenting with other things, right? Trying to figure out what the next thing after Agile is. So that's where I think Agile has ended up. So what's the next thing, right? We need to wait for the next guru. We need some smart people on a council, and they'll figure out what Agile 2.0 or super fast 2.0 or whatever they call it is. My advice is don't wait for that guy, right? Because no one can tell you what your team isn't doing right except your team, right? You have to look at what you're doing, find the things that aren't as optimal as they could possibly be, right, and fix those things, right? So I believe the new Agile paradigm is going to be a lot more about introspection, right? We know moving fast is awesome. We know that the Nexus things that were mentioned in the keynote and in a lot of other presentations, all those things are really, really important. But the thing that no one else can tell you that will really make yourselves better is to look at your team, figure out what you're not doing optimally, and fix those things. So that's what we've done at Atlassian. So there are lots of things we've done. I could definitely spend a whole week talking about all the different projects that have made us better, but I'm going to focus on these 4 things because I think they apply broadly to lots and lots of people. All right, so I'm going to redisplay the slide over and over again, so those of you taking notes will get other chances. I'm going to start with building kick-ass things at the top. Right? So building kick-ass things is the most important thing to do, right? Like, it doesn't matter how great your process is or how much your people like working there if you're building stuff that's stupid, right? So you want your users to be like, yes, it's awesome. So we have a saying at Atlassian, other people use this too, it's fake it until you make it, right? So we want to make sure that we are getting our ideas out in front of customers as quickly as we possibly can. Right? We want to get their feedback immediately before we've wasted 1,000 man-hours building some new feature that people don't even want. So here's an experiment. This wasn't Atlassian, some other company that will remain nameless. They were trying to do some speech-to-text software, right, where you talk into a microphone and then the words just come up on your screen. Right? So they built this prototype, and users would come there and they would talk, and they would just magically see the words they wrote. And what was actually happening behind the scenes is there was a guy just listening, right, and typing as fast as he could, right? Now, that sounds pretty funny, but what they uncovered in this experiment is that people like text or speech to text in really, really small doses, but no one's going to sit there all day talking into their email, right? People just can't spend 10 hours talking into their computer. Their voice gets sore. If you have 100 people in a room, all doing that, it gets extremely noisy. It's crazy. So what these guys uncovered is that the user enthusiasm for this feature wasn't as great as it seemed like it could be, right? Technologically, it's possible to do this. Some of us do this with our phones now all the time, right? But at the time this experiment was done, that little test, right, was very easy to execute, and they uncovered some awesome learning about users and whether they wanted this feature or not, right? So find opportunities like that as much as possible, right? Fake it until you know for sure it's worth the time investment. Even before doing that, even before making a real page and putting it out there, right, an HTML guy could make something like that relatively quickly, but even before doing that, at Atlassian, we use what we call paper prototypes. Right? So this will be a video. Hopefully it plays. Yes. So this is real. This is us doing some prototyping. Right? So we just draw some sketches. We have a person come and click stuff like we make fake expands. We'll do this in 20 different ways and have users play around with it. And we get to have a real conversation because they're just sitting there right across from us, clicking, pretend clicking. And what we do with this is we really find out which way users prefer. It literally only takes us an hour to put something like this together in a bunch of different versions. But the best part is that the person who makes this isn't quite as passionate about this design as he would be if he was a developer that spent a day making that HTML page, right? You make an HTML page like that and put it in front of some users that hate it, the developer starts to get offended and personally feels bad and all that stuff, right? So when you do it on paper, that attachment isn't quite as strong. You do it quick. Paper you just crinkle up and throw away, right? Like you don't do that to somebody's hours of development time. That feels bad. So paper prototypes, super awesome. So we do that when we're building something new, but we're not always building something new, right? We've been making software for 12 years, so we've got a lot of software that's already out there, and our job every day is mostly about constantly improving that software. So we're not going to make a paper prototype for Jira, right? Because it's got, you know, dozens of screens, and it would take way too long. What we do want to do, though, is we want to make sure that we're collecting feedback, right? So we generate a kick-ass feedback experience. I was traveling through Heathrow last month. We did a Jira Service Desk road trip in Europe, and as I was going through Heathrow, there was this little feedback machine. Right? I don't know if you can see the buttons, but there's like a little frown face and a smiley face on there. And so like in a second, you can say, you know, this feedback or this security experience today was awesome, or this one sucked. Right? And it was right there as people were walking by. Like you couldn't help but click it, right? And so it was super simple. They probably got an immense amount of feedback using this mechanism, right? So we try to do stuff like that with our software. We make sure it's simple. We make sure it's really fast, right? If a user has to go through a bunch of trouble and answer some, you know, 15-page SurveyMonkey thing, like they're not going to do it. They're going to get to page 3 and just bail, right? So make it super simple. When we were developing the new Agile boards in Jira Agile, formerly called Greenhopper, we put a big got feedback thing at the very top of the menu, right there, right? We've always had a got feedback button somewhere, but usually it's like down in the footer. And we wanted to make it front and center, top of mind for users, so they could really share their opinion on what we were doing, right? We got 4 times as much feedback using that than we would have if we kept our old feedback mechanism, right? Which is a little more subtle down at the bottom. This gave us an immense amount of real user conversations that we could have. This is the feedback form. Like there's a really smiley face, frown face thing at the top. It was pretty cool, and we got like hundreds of people responded. It was really cool. Anyway. So again, make sure it's easy to find, super simple, fast to submit. Now, as soon as you start doing that, you start getting tons and tons and tons of feedback, right? And it's important. I know some of you are thinking, wait, I've got to shield my developers from that, right? If I'm at Google, right, making Gmail, I've got to protect those guys. These stats are a little bit old, but about a year ago, Gmail had 425 million users and 100 developers working on it. Right? So that's 1 developer for every 4.25 million users, right? If they're personally responding to everyone's feedback, right, they're never going to build any software, right? They're just going to be a feedback bot. So now, at some scales, this doesn't work, but at Atlassian, we are still small enough. We're not Gmail, right? We're still at the scale that we can take all of our developers and make sure we put them on the front lines, right? So all of our developers are constantly in second-tier support, right? They answer questions, they solve problems, they type stuff on answers.atlassian.com. If you Google a problem for Atlassian software, a solution to something you're trying to do, you're going to find an answer to it, and most of those answers have been written by developers, right? We take our developers, they're on second-tier support all the time, but we also put them on front-tier support for a little while, right? We want them to build a direct relationship with actual people using the software, right? So they understand their frustrations and the things that they love. The other thing we do is we really make sure to get personal in that feedback, right? We'll have an actual product guy respond with his real email address, right? We don't have some like invented persona that responds to everything, right? We want to make sure that if somebody says, I really, really want, I don't know, visual source safe integration with fisheye, right? I want the developer who's choosing, or the product team who's choosing to not make that our highest priority, to have to explain why he's doing that to the customer who wants it, right? And as soon as you start to explain things like that, the customer feels a lot more connected to what you guys are doing. So we put all of our developers on support. Generally, that happens at the beginning of all of their lives, and then periodically, as time goes on, they rotate back through. Building kick-ass things is about making sure you're actually building kick-ass things, and then caring about your customers and making sure you have an effective feedback loop. And I can tell you these things are the things you should do, but what you really should do is try to do these things and then look at yourselves and then gradually improve the parts that you're not doing kick-ass. Okay, so that's the first one, kick-ass things. Building one kick-ass team is next. So I talked about developers and support. Let's talk about developers and testers for a second. So developers and testers have very different skills and passions and all that stuff. And so what you might say is, like, my developers make crappy testers, right? My testers probably make crappy developers, right? And so connecting those into one role sounds like it might be scary, right? What we found as we looked into this more is, initially at Atlassian, we're all about automated testing, right? So we started out with just developers and a bunch of automated tests. And over time, we started to realize some things were slipping through the cracks, and so we hired a QA person to come in, and he said, you know what, there are some things you can't test with an automated script, right? You need some people doing stuff in this process. So we're like, okay, that's cool. And we hired a couple more, and then a couple more, and then we started to realize, like, every time I hire 10 more developers, I need a bunch more testers too. And so as I scale, that becomes a challenge, right? It becomes something that creates bottlenecks, right? If 10 developers spend 8 hours coding or 10 hours coding in a day, right, I've got 1 or 2 testers that have to work all night to catch up, right? And that's bad. It also creates accountability problems where my developers think, okay, well, I coded all day. Hey, everyone, tell me if I made any mistakes, right? And so they don't feel connected to the quality of the software as much. And the other thing I just mentioned is about scalability, right? When Atlassian has 2,000 developers instead of just however many hundred we have right now, I want to make sure that that I'm getting the most customer value out of that, and that I'm minimizing my overhead with people that aren't actually contributing code. So we have what we call developer on test. We call this dotting, right? So developer on testing, and we make sure that our developers are always testing each other's things. I'll talk a little bit more. For an example, on the Jira team, this stat's a little bit old now too. We hired 100 people last quarter, so that's sort of the rate we're growing at. This is from about April. 61 developers working on just Jira, 4 QA people. Right? So that's our ratio. Some of you might have a different ratio. I've worked at places where we even had a 50-50 ratio, right? That's a lot of people that aren't making new features for your customers. So we try to minimize that number as much as we can. Now, 4 people can't test everything 61 developers make, so we definitely have developers responsible for testing each other's work. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so you're just making your developers do all the work. And that's not an exact description of what's happening, right? We've changed QA to quality assistance. It's not quality assurance. The whole team is responsible for quality assurance, right? Quality's job is to make sure developers are testing the easy things, and experienced testers are testing the hard things, and the right stuff is going through automated tests, and the right things are being scripted, right? So here are 6 tips for kick-ass dotting, and dotting again is developer on test. First, training, right? Developers aren't just going to walk in one day and just figure out how to do awesome, thorough testing, right? So we spend lots of time, just like we do with support, working with experienced QA people, figuring out how to do this right, what not to do, what to give to other people. Second, pairing, right? All of our developers, every time they commit something, send that to other developers to review every time, right? So product pairing is the next way. Next, we do blitz testing. So when I say blitz, I don't mean like the product guy and the developer and the QA guy. I mean like everybody. Our finance guys do it, I do it, and marketing does it. Like everyone tests it. We dog food our software. So everything we use at Atlassian is the latest version of our software, right? So if we roll a build to our test server and it breaks my ability to look at Jira tickets, right? That stops work, right, until that's fixed. And so we instantly get back into the development cycle, any critical problems like that. So a month later, when it's actually pushed out to customers, like we've gone through all the growing pains ourselves. Next, now this is advanced dotting. We have what we call the test recipe. So QA people are good at testing like really hard, complex things, right? Like you ask a developer to test some address collection form, and he puts his own address in there and the office address in there, and right. A QA person goes in there and they know that the zip code in Connecticut starts with a 0, right? So that if it's not a string, if it's a number, that it might fail and things like that, right? That's what experienced QA people do. So QA people at Atlassian write test recipes so that they can scale their knowledge, right, and pass it onward. The other thing that happens when you do that is a QA person gives you this list of 26 steps to some developer, right, to, hey, do this tomorrow when you check your code in. He says, that's way too much work. I'm going to write a script, right, that does this and put it in the automated test batch so I don't have to do 27 things, right? So by making test recipes with experienced QA people, giving that to developers to either manually do it or motivate themselves to automate it, we get the maximized testing experience across the team. Next, we do split sessions. So split sessions is like the opposite of pairing, right? We take 2 people, a developer and a QA person, and put them in different rooms to test the exact same thing. Then they come back together and compare notes and see what they each learned from each other. And then finally, we have a bug hunter. And this guy, we rotate through. We generally have 1 bug hunter at any one point in time. And he just like picks a new feature and then like pounds the crap out of it, right? He just tries to find a bug, right, any way he can. And so when a feature goes through bug hunting like that, we feel really, really confident that it's bulletproof at the end. The moral of the story here is quality is everyone's responsibility. So it's not just the qualities guy. If something breaks, it's the whole team's responsibility to find it and fix it. Okay, so we're trying to build one cohesive team here, right, where everybody's responsible for all the same things. And so developers and support guys work really closely together. Developers and testers work really closely together. Then these design guys come in, right, and they're like working in Photoshop. Nobody even has access to Photoshop. They have these documents no one can open. There's all these things, right, no one else understands how to do. And then the opposite is true, right? The design guys are trying to talk to the developers, and they don't understand why the alignment isn't up 1 pixel and all that stuff, right? So we try to make sure that we're minimizing that friction as well, right? So we hire developers at Atlassian that do a pretty good job at design, right? Originally, I said, we just try to hire developers that can do everything, right? And then we start to realize, hey, maybe there's a challenge with that design. A developer making something that tests something, right? He might make a form that looks like this, right? It's got all the options a user could possibly need. They're all together in one form so a user can run through that quickly. That's not the best design I'd want to put to my users, right? So the developer says, I have this test harness tool. I use it all the time. It's awesome. And then some customer comes to me and says, hey, can you build a kick-ass test automation tool? My developer says, oh, yeah, I have one already. Here you go. Right? And they give them this, and they're like, wait, this is too confusing. I don't understand which things I fill out and which I don't. So the developer says, here, I'll add some colors and stuff to it. Right? So now here, it's awesome. You could probably use it now, right? And the customer's like, what? I don't even know what those things mean. And then you give them a website to make, and it looks like this. And so the moral of the story is maybe developers can't just do design on their own, right? So we need to have designers. Why should we have designers? So we first hire our first designer. He looks at our stuff, and he's like, yeah, you guys need a designer. And we're like, why? What's going on? And he's like, let's take drop-down boxes, for instance. They look sort of different from each other. in all your products. Like here's some more drop-down boxes and another one, and this list just goes on and on and on. Like every developer we ever hired invented their own drop-down box, right? And so for users, this was insane, right? Literally, it just keeps going and going and going. So we're like, okay, maybe our developers need a little bit of guidance. All those buttons were awesome, right? Like they weren't bad, they just weren't the same, right? So maybe we suck at design development. So as I mentioned earlier, I think the point of the new Agile is to look at what you're doing, find the things that you could do better, right? So if we suck at making drop-down boxes, we're going to tackle that problem and fix it, right? So we also want to make sure that every time I hire 10 new developers, I don't need to hire 4 new designers, right? Because as I scale to 2,000 developers, I don't want to be a 10,000 person company. I want to stay at the ratio that we're at right now. So as I hire more designers, right? Do I want more designers? No, I want more developers, and I want to scale the design decision-making process, right? Just like I did with QA. So here's how we do that. Our developers aren't bad designers. They just need guidance and stuff to follow, examples, right? So we give them design guidance. So we just released the Atlassian design guidelines earlier in the spring. You can go to this website yourself. It's developer.atlassian.com/design, right? So all of this is available. You can borrow from it, copy from it. We encourage all our marketplace developers to use our design paradigm, so it's really, really easy and seamless for our users. So you'll also notice there's a user interface sandbox here. So you can click it and you can say like, I want the button to be blue, and it tells you what code to use. You can put code there, and then it'll show you what the button is, right? So even without knowing anything about design or HTML or JavaScript or whatever you want to use, you can use the sandbox to sort of play around with design and see what it's going to look like. So that's our design guidelines. And so what we've done here is to create just enough guidance for our developers to stay consistent with each other, follow the design paradigm that we've established, and then propagate it out to hundreds of pages and 17 different products, right? And so then we make tools to test the design, right? There's test harnesses that tell if our buttons are not the right proportion and if our color scheme is out of whack and stuff like that, right? And all of that together culminates in what we call dev speed. So dev speed is the process of making kick-ass software. Again, we have a design workshop, just like we did with QA, where we have our developers go and learn from the experience of our experienced designers, and they repeat back through that as often as they need to. And the other thing that we're doing here is the opposite, right? Our developers are our designers now, but also we want to make sure that as our designers are doing stuff in Photoshop and giving it to someone who can't read Photoshop, right, we're removing some of that friction, right? So we give our designers tools to let them be developers, right? So we build frameworks that let designers work directly in HTML harness, right? Like we give them the AUI harness so that they can actually just set up the alignment and build the HTML as they're designing, so that they still build things in Photoshop, right? But they don't do most things that way. They come into the harness and they tweak things, they change things, and see what alignment is going to look like in the real software. So that we're letting designers be developers too. So we're trying to blur the lines between teams, trying to create one team delivering kick-ass software, not a bunch of teams creating kick-ass software. So, moral of the story, development barriers slow you down, work together as one team, and constantly look at yourself and keep improving how you're doing. All right, next, we're going to talk about collaboration. So, kick-ass collaboration is about, right, everybody talking all the time, making sure you're making decisions together, learning from each other's mistakes. Right? When I first started in 1994, like I sat in my cubicle and I had like, I was building software on my own laptop. No one ever saw it. Didn't matter if I commented because I built it, right? I knew what it was doing. If somebody had to fix it, it was going to be me. Like those were the days, right? That was awesome. The problem starts coming in when you add like 52 other people to the team, and you have to then, like, other people are yelling at me because I didn't do it the way they like it, and I'm yelling at them. Everybody just throws away everyone else's code and redoes it because they like their way better, right? Problem starts happening when you have a bunch of people doing it. So we've tried to look at that process and make sure that we're optimizing it for the experience, making sure that we have the most effective collaboration possible. All right, so let's a little example to step out of development for a second. So rules make traffic work, right? Everyone's familiar with this. There's a red light, half the people stop, right? Do nothing, no more driving for a little bit. Other people drive for a while, and then they stop, and then other people drive. So you go back and forth like that. Lots of rules there, and lots of people stopped, not driving, right? Now, here's another example. This is India, right? Now, I've watched this like 35 times, and I can't see any rules. Like, I don't understand how anybody is moving, but traffic is moving, right? Like, people will find their way through the system in the way that works, right? So now, I'm not advocating the getting rid of traffic rules, right? Because they protect us from accidents, and that's pretty important. So it's maybe worth getting rid of some driving momentum in order to wait for people to not crash into the side of your car, right? The same thing happens in development, right? You need rules to protect you. How many people work at a place where they have a development process map that looks something like this, right? You don't have to raise your hand, but I have worked at a place like that, right? Lots of rules in there, everybody trying to follow the same process. It's really hard to update a document like this and make sure that it's still accurate and efficient. We have a much more simplified workflow at Atlassian. 3 things: branch, pull, merge. I'll talk about these things in more detail here, but we create a branch really, really often. Pull requests are the thing that help us make sure that other developers are reviewing our code before it goes to production. And merging is something that we all do collectively together, and a lot of it is automated. All right, so branching first. We branch for every single task. I'm not talking about every project or every release or iteration or epic, right? Every task, we'd make a branch. And the life of one of our branches, right, in Jira, this is Jira Agile, right? There's a create branch link right inside of Jira Agile. So when you start working on that issue over there, you create the branch right away, right? It pulls it out, creates a unique sandbox for yourself, right? And we make sure you fix that thing and check it back in, right? So our average branch life is only 2 days. It's really short, it's easy to review, and we check it back into master as soon as possible, right? So next, we do pull requests. So as our developers are committing their code, they reach out to other developers in an automated way and get their feedback immediately. So we share things with 5 people. We wait for 2 of them to respond. If we get 2 approvals, we check it into master, right? So we don't wait for all 5 people to have, to get back from vacation or whatever, right? 2 out of 5 is close enough, and we merge it back in. And you can create whatever rules make sense for your comfort zone, right? So let's talk about why we review code here for a second. We got a game show. I say, why do you want to discuss your code changes? And Julie rings in because I want better quality, right? Awesome, yes, we do want that. Lynn says, I want to learn. That's a great answer too, right? Learning is something that other people's code, looking at other people's code really, really helps you. I want to feel better. That's less good answer, but if it gets him through the day, whatever. This guy, I want to blame, right? There's definitely people there that want pull requests so that happens. That's a bad reason, but you should do it anyway. All right, so again, I said 2 people approving is good enough to merge back in. And now the other thing that happens is, at Atlassian, we prefer co-located teams, right? It's great if everyone's in the same room, they're sitting across from each other working together. That's not always possible. We have people scattered all over, right? I have a guy working in Hamburg. I have 2 people working in 2 other countries that report to me. There's no team meeting that we can ever have because we're not ever awake at the same time, right? That's hard, right? So you need some ways of communicating asynchronously, right? Also, some people work more productively in different environments, right? If I'm working on a kick-ass presentation to deliver at Gartner AADI, I don't want to be in the office surrounded by people that ask me questions all day, right? I need to be like at a coffee shop, at my house with headphones on, focused. And so the environment needs to be really flexible where people are working because everybody has a different comfort zone, right? So when you add all that stuff to the equation, we've got people trying to communicate on 5 different continents, different time zones every day. So one of the ways we do that is with email, right? So everybody knows email lets you do things like this. So who loves email? Crickets. Yes, us either, right? Nobody loves email. It's horrible, right? People like come in the morning and you've got like 10,000. Did you know that Gmail goes to 10,000 in your inbox? Like that's horrible. Anyway, so emails are too long. They're bad for conversations. You get tons of spam, so it's hard to figure out the important stuff from the non-important stuff. So we try not to use email. Who uses chat here every day, right? Awesome, right? Chat is a really cool method for communicating. We use HipChat. You can use whatever chat product makes you comfortable. One of the things, though, that's great about HipChat is that it saves the thread even if you're not online. A bunch of Sydney and Gdansk, Poland people have a conversation in the middle of the night when I'm sleeping. I can come in the morning and the room that I'm in, right, shows me the thread that happened and I can catch up, right? That's pretty cool. We have chat rooms also, so a person can subscribe to their chat room based on topics that are important to them. They can pop in and pop out, read, even if they weren't invited to the thread at the time the conversation was live, they can come back in and check it out later, right? So all these are great things about HipChat, right? Fantastic for remote conversations, fantastic for working in different time zones, and you can pull other people in the conversation just by mentioning somebody. Choose your tools wisely, that's the point, right? Don't use email for everything just because that's convenient and open in front of you all day, right? Use your wiki, use your chat, use your email collectively for the things that make the most sense, right? We also did something cool. We had 2 offices across the street from each other. And we wanted to build a portal, right, like in Stargate, where we could just and end up in the other office. We'll have that one day, but not quite yet. So in the meantime, we built this, right? Super cheap. It's a TV, a camera, and a Mac Mini for barely over $1,000, and we could just talk to each other on different continents or across the street. It's pretty slick and way better than Skype. Collaboration friction is the thing that we want to eliminate. And I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to have to zip through things really, really quickly in the last part. But automation, right? Automation is the last pillar, right? Automate as much as you can. We make software every day, right? All of us probably make some software every day, right? That's why we're here learning about application development. So make software that makes you better, right? Kick-ass automation will get you through a lot of challenges. Look at how many hours of a week you're spending automating your own stuff, right? You automate something, you save time forever after that, right? So it's a really, really great investment of time. Who's doing continuous integration here? Awesome, a pretty good percentage. Who's doing kick-ass continuous integration? Huh? All right, awesome. So with us, continuous integration is about making sure building is going as fast as possible, right? When our developers check code in Jira, they get feedback on whether that broke something in 8 minutes, right? So they know immediately if it broke the build, if originally, right, our build sucked. They did. It took like hours and hours, right? We were running things that we shouldn't have been running every minute, every commit. So what we did was we wanted to make sure that our developers could fail as fast as possible. And so we did that by taming our monster builds. First, we passed the artifact. So I could talk for an hour just on artifact passing. It was one of the biggest things we've done in Atlassian development history. That's a graph of our build time shrinking when we decided to do that. Next, parallelize your tests, right? If things don't need to go synchronously, make them run at the same time. Next, set up different tiers of tests, right? So that you're doing your UI stuff every check-in, but you're doing your performance test every night when people are sleeping. Those things can run longer and have more control of the environments. All right? And then finally, look at your stats. Look at what you're doing constantly. Make sure you're optimizing your build. Shrink it as fast as possible. Automate as many things as possible, right? More automation optimization. We've got the Flakey test detector. If things work, fail sometimes and work other times without the code changing, we kick that test out, right? We quarantine it, don't run it again until somebody looks at why that happened. Right? We also have wallboards everywhere. There are TVs like every 10 feet at Atlassian, and they're always displaying our progress and performance. We have a Freud Bot that looks in the code and tries to find things like, using magic numbers instead of variables, things like that, right? Use your skills to automate things, right? Your teams make software. They should be making some software for themselves as well, right? We also made this actual button. Like, we pushed that button to roll our code to production. It's kind of awesome. Okay, so 4 things for kick-ass software development. It looks like that. Again, where's Agile going? It's off the page, right? There's something new coming, and I think it has to do with looking at yourself, finding the things that aren't going as fast as possible, right, and optimizing them. No one can tell you what's broken except you. Think of it as like running a triathlon, right? If you're preparing for a triathlon, no one can say to win a triathlon, you need to spend 20 minutes a day swimming, right? You need to try it, right? See how fast of a swimmer you are, and if you're a sucky swimmer, swim more, right? And same thing with running or biking, right? You can't just say, here's the methodology for winning triathlons, right? You have to look at the kinds of things that you're awesome at and focus maybe slightly less on those, and focus on the things that you can make better to be excellent in everything you do, right? That's the moral of the story, right? Share your successes and failures. We encourage you to do it externally as well. Share your things with your customers, get their feedback, right? And build a kick-ass culture so that the things you're doing are just part of the way of life at your company, right? I started here with the kick-ass guy, right? He came in every day and he was just trying to change the world, and until he actually assembled a kick-ass team around him and they started learning from each other, he was getting his ass kicked, right? And some of your teams are doing that too, right? So as you work on pulling it together with some of the lessons in this slide, I promise that you can step out of your comfort zone, be more awesome, and make sure at the end of the day you can answer yes to this question. And that's all I got.